Alright, welcome back. This is the New Industrial Age Part 2 Notes lecture by video. And today we will continue where we left off with railroads. Last time we talked about how railroads led to growth of cities, helped spur other industries, and created new time zones. Now we're going to talk about Mr. Pullman. Now, George Pullman is going to create a factory for manufacturing sleepers, okay? Sleeping cars that people sleep in on railroad in Illinois. He builds a nearby town for his employees, and they modeled the town after the industrial European towns of the day. But a lot of his workers felt he was very puritanical. The town was too strict, and we'll see in 1880 that when he lowers wages, but not rent, it's going to lead to a violent strike in 1894. Okay, and I don't believe this is the first strike during this new industrial age, but it is a unique to railroads. Okay, we also see how stockholders in the Union Pacific Railroad will form a construction company in 1864. All right, and this is going to lead to a scandal for a company called Credit Mobilier. The stockholders would then give the contracts to the company to lay track at 3 times the actual cost, and they would pocket the difference. Then they donated the shares of the stock to 20 Republican members of Congress in 1867. This is an example of, uh, you can see this is how corruption at its finest. And a lot of people got away with this kind of stuff back then. It's a lot easier to hide from the newspaper, from the media, than it is today. Alright, farmers are also affected by corruption in the railroad industry. We talked about the formation of the Grange to fight the railroads. They protested land deals, price fixings, charging different rates to different customers. And then they would soon see passed Granger laws, or will soon be passed to help protect farmers. And states will be given regulation control of the railroads by the courts. And so these Grangers helped put a stop to railroad corruption. But all this corruption stopped in 1887, at least for the most part, when the federal government reestablishes their control over railway activities by Congress passing the Interstate Commerce Act. This creates a 5-member Interstate Commerce Commission, and even with this law passed, they still struggled to gain power until about 1906. Okay. One of the things we're going to see is we're going to see a lot of laws created to fight corruption in big business, but it's not going to be until the turn of the 20th century by presidents like Teddy Roosevelt, William Howard Taft, and Woodrow Wilson that will stand up for the people as presidents and fight this corruption in what is known as the Progressive Era. Alright, now we move into part 3, which is our biggest section. So, Andrew Carnegie, alright, he was one of the first industrial moguls. Alright, he is going to enter the steel industry in 1873, and by 1899, his Carnegie Steel Company will make more steel than all the factories of Great Britain combined. Okay? Let's talk about his business practices. Okay, he's going to initiate many new business practices, such as searching for ways to make better products more cheaply, creating accounting systems to help track expenses, and to attract quality people by offering them stock and benefits. Alright. He's going to try to control as much of his industry as possible. Well, how is he going to do this? Well, it's through a process that's known as vertical integration. This is where you buy out all your suppliers. He buys the coal fields. He buys the mines, the iron, the ore, the freighters, alright, the rail lines. He buys everything. This way, he controls the materials and the transportation. Okay? So here's an example of the vertical integration steel process. So So the Mesabi Iron Range will go to the railroads, which will lead to Duluth, Minnesota, which goes to Cleveland and Gary, Indiana, which for the Lake Superior steamship lines, the railroad rolling stock and engines go to the J. Edgar Thompson plant. We also have the anthracite coal mines, led by Henry Frick, all right, and Tennessee Iron and Coal Company will use the railroads to also take it to the plant, where they go for the Bessemer and the Kelly process and the rolling mills, and then eventually to the Homestead plant in Pittsburgh. Okay? And this is an example of vertical integration. I will, yes. All right. Well, what is horizontal integration? Well, this is where you buy up all the competition through friendly and hostile takeovers. This is where you buy all the companies that produce similar products, in this case, other steel companies. So vertical integration is when you buy all the products, okay? All the supplies. All right, horizontal integration is when you buy all the other companies that are like you. All the companies that make other steel products is an example of horizontal integration. And so these mergers could result in what is known as a monopoly or a trust. Now, I'll be using the term monopoly and trust interchangeably, okay? So if I say monopoly, that's referring to a trust. If I say trust, that is a monopoly, okay? Especially throughout the rest of this 9 weeks, mainly, okay? Now, a monopoly or a trust is when you take complete control over an industry. So, for example, John D. Rockefeller and with Standard Oil in 1870 only owned 2% of the country's oil. 10 years later, okay, he takes control of 90% of the oil and becomes the richest man in America. Okay, at least at the moment. I don't have to look up who the richest American of all time is. I believe it's one of these men, but I could be wrong. All right, and so a new idea came about that is going to affect how industrialists and others view business, and that is this philosophy known as social Darwinism. Okay, it roots in the idea of Darwin's theory of evolution. So one of the things Darwin theorized is that some individuals in a species flourish and pass on their traits while others do not. Okay, so social Darwinists like Herbert Spencer, he believed that riches was a sign of God's favor, and that being poor was a sign of inferiority and laziness, which is terrible. Okay, and although Darwin focused more on the animal world, it was Herbert Spencer that brought these ideas of the survival of the fittest to man's world. Okay, and so yeah, so basically, social Darwinists saw as the rich as they were in favor of God, and honestly, that's true of Rockefeller. He almost died in a train crash, and when that happened, he saw himself he was set for something great. Like he was going to be something. He was going to be someone nobody would ever forget, and that's true. Nobody ever forgot. Nobody's ever going to forget John D. Rockefeller. I can promise you that. Robber barons. Okay, this is a nickname given to cutthroat industrialists. Okay, the critics began to call them robber barons. All right, and all these famous robber barons include people like Andrew Carnegie, John D. Rockefeller, Cornelius Vanderbilt, Stanford, and J.P. Morgan. Okay, but yet even the robber barons gave back to the community. Despite being labeled as greedy barons, these rich industrialists were very generous. And so, what we call philanthropy is when rich people decide to give bukukus of money to people and other things. For example, Carnegie built libraries all across the country. We've got several of them in Texas. Rockefeller, Leland, Stanford, and Cornelius also built schools, all right, to help influence education. Many of these men were not able to go to school because they had to support their families. Oftentimes, the richest people in America never had a true formal education. Isn't that something? And so the United States is going to pass a law known as the Sherman Antitrust Act in 1890. This is going to make it illegal for companies to form monopolies. But the problem was, it was nearly impossible to prosecute a company under the act. So what they would do is a company would they would just reorganize their company into a bunch of small companies. So 7/8 of all cases that were brought to the Supreme Court were thrown out. This is another example of how corruption and how, we're going to see when we get to our big, in a few couple weeks, we're going to talk about the Progressive Era, and we're going to see how these companies were influencing the times. Okay? Workers had terrible conditions, and they were paid terribly. They worked 6 to 7 days a week. They had no vacations, no sick leave, and no compensation for injuries. And injuries happened all the time. In 1882, an average of 675 workers were killed per week on the job. And this is going to lead to the creation of labor unions. And as conditions for these laborers are going to worsen, workers are going to realize they need to reorganize. And so the first large-scale national organization of workers, known as the National Labor Union in 1886. We're also going to see the Colored National Labor Union is going to follow shortly after. Okay? Let me check here. All right. I'm going to stop here, and we will continue with labor unions when we come back. Thank you.